Hello, my name is Kent Trammell, and I want to welcome you to another Art of Sculpting episode where we will be focusing on the artistic style of caricature, the art of exaggeration. We see this all the time at fairs, carnivals, or Disney World, where you sit down and an artist focuses on your distinct facial features, then exploits them to create a fun and stylistic image. Similarly, I want to show you how you can sculpt caricatures because it serves as a great exercise in understanding what makes people recognizable. And my subject is someone you all should know, fellow instructor Pippin Williamson, and we'll be caricaturizing this photograph here. Okay, well actually it's Jonathan's twin brother Pippin, but they're twins and Jonathan's smile revealed his teeth, which is something I didn't want to worry about. So basically this is Jonathan. Now, before we jump into three-dimensional caricature, let's first practice identifying distinguishing features in two-dimensional photos. Here in Photoshop, I have 5 images of random faces, and I want to go one by one and identify 1 or 2 main features that I would exaggerate if I were to caricaturize each face. So let's zoom in here at our first person. Let's try to get that girl out of the way as much as possible. And take a moment to analyze his face and see what your eye is drawn to. For me, my eyes are drawn to 2 places. First, his eyes, which seem fairly small, but then he's also got very small lenses in his glasses, which makes his eyes feel even smaller. So that's something I would definitely exaggerate in a caricature. Also, I'm drawn to the lower half of his face, the jaw and the smile, this area right in here. The smile is a fairly unique shape, but his teeth are crooked just enough to make it a good candidate for exaggeration. Also, the distance between the mouth and the chin is pretty large, so sort of Jay Leno style, I would exaggerate the size of the chin. The next person, I'll give you a moment. There's one distinguishing feature that I'm immediately drawn to. I'll give you a second to kind of analyze it. Like the first face, I'm also drawn to the eyes, but for a different reason. And it's the slant of the eyes from outside to in. They seem to slant down, kind of forming a V shape like this. That's something I would definitely exaggerate. Also, for her mouth, it's a little bit lopsided, where on this right side, it's a little less extreme than the left side. Also, her cheeks are fairly large and very bulbous and round. That's something that I would emphasize. Now for the next person, I'll give you a moment to study. Immediately, I'm drawn to 2 things. Number 1, the hourglass shape of his head, which I would exaggerate to be something like this. And number 2, the size of his forehead. Now it's not helping that he doesn't have much hair up there, but my eye is immediately drawn to this huge blank space. The next guy, give you a moment. There's one key feature that sticks out to me about this face. If we just compare it to the other one, this one on the right feels like it's almost been smashed vertically. So I would certainly exaggerate the vertical length of the head. And coupled with his hairline, we get a very square shape. Moving on to our last face, we have a child. I will give you a moment to study. This is, of course, a child, and when it comes to children, you have to keep in mind that the head and the face is not fully formed, whereas with all these other images, we have adults, and they have reached their full proportion in the face. But children have not, namely the eyes. Now, I'm pretty sure that your eyeballs are the same size when you're born as they are when you die. It's a part of your body that just doesn't grow. So your face does grow, however, like your nose grows, your mouth grows, your teeth grow. So as a child, all those features are more compact. But your eyes stay the same size. So they look generally big on children. But with this child in particular, the size of the northern hemisphere of the head is much larger than the southern hemisphere down here. So as a caricature, we would get something like a light bulb shape. Something like this. And beyond the fact that this is a child, so the eyes are a little bit larger, the distance between the eyes is larger than even most children. So that's something I would also exaggerate, making sure to push his eyes further apart from one another. So hopefully that's been a good exercise for you to wrap your mind around how to look for distinguishing characteristics. Now let's do the same thing with the Williamson brothers. Here we have the original photograph of Jonathan and Pippin. Jonathan is on the left. As you can see, his smile is showing teeth, and those are just intricate, time-consuming details that I didn't want to worry about with this sculpture. And lucky for me, he's got a twin brother who is smiling and not showing his teeth, so we're going to focus on Pippin. I will just single his image out, move him off to the side, maybe scale him up a little bit. There we go. Then I will duplicate the layer, move it off to the right side, and take the opacity down to about 50%. So that I can make some notes about distinguishing features on the right side and also see the original on the left. And one of the first things I notice about this face is the jaw shape. Let me create a new layer, jump over to my brush. Unlike a typical square jaw that might have a shape similar to that, this jaw is pretty much cornerless, all the way down to the chin. And it doesn't come to a point because over here in the original we can see that the chin is certainly bulbous and round, but we definitely don't see a corner on the jaw. So if we connect the other side of the face like that, I think this is certainly a distinguishing feature of the face. And also look at the distance between the chin and the mouth and the nose. Below there's a lot more distance, so I'll want to exaggerate that a little bit. And since he is smiling, I'll go ahead and exaggerate the width of the lips, and also be sure to include these very noticeable dimples in the corners of the cheeks. I think those are quite distinguishing. And continuing up the face is the nose. Now it's fairly bulbous, so I'll want to exaggerate that fact. And if we segregate the nose into 3 separate ball shapes, up front we have a pretty large one that covers the majority of the nose, and then the nostrils are much smaller spheres like that. Exaggerating this should also help. And then as far as the eyes, what I notice is the plane of the eyes, where instead of being straight across the head like this, from inside corner to outside corner, they seem to slant downwards, more like that. This is also something I want to exaggerate a bit. And then if we continue up into the hair, it's a pretty wavy or even curly style hair, so that'll be easy to exaggerate, where the shape in the photograph is kind of an M shape like this. I can just exaggerate that when I sculpt like that. And then be sure to exaggerate our curls. And if I hit all these features, it should end up looking like Jonathan or like Pippin here. But I don't want to make my list of features too small. I want to keep about 3 or 4 that I really want to get right. And in this case, it's the jaw, the width and shape of the smile, the bulbous nature of the nose, and the plane of the eyes. That's 4 things that I really want to hit well. If I can do that, then I can fill in the gaps of all the other features like the eyebrows and the ears without the pressure of them being distinguishing features. Whereas if I try to break down the structure and shape of every single facial feature and try to exaggerate it for the purpose of caricature, I'll become overwhelmed, and it will actually hinder how recognizable the caricature is. So be sure to keep your key feature list small. Okay, now that we've made these 2D observations, I feel comfortable jumping into Blender and beginning the 3D caricature. The first thing I'll do is import a pre-made head base mesh that's included with the source files. It is a wavefront.obj format, and it's called basehead.obj, and it's just a very simple mesh that is a good starting point when sculpting a bust or a face. And then I will open a reference sheet over here below my properties panel. Let's split the window. Make this bottom one a UV image editor and open our image where I have two photos, the one we've already looked at and then also a sort of side view, the best thing that Jonathan could give me, which I think will be plenty to get a good likeness from a side angle, because now we're in 3D, we have to worry about all different angles. So that is set up. Let's be sure to pin the image so I don't lose it in case I tab into edit mode. Maybe I don't need quite that much horizontal space. And now before we jump into sculpt mode, I think I will go ahead and roughly proportion this base mesh to be a caricature of Jonathan's face over here. So let's, using circle select with C. Oh man, I always forget to turn on screencast keys. There we go. Circle select with C and select our head area. Let's move it up. Although let's enable proportional editing, and I like connected, which can be done with Alt-O, and move that head up, taking with it some of the neck to elongate the neck. I'm going to exaggerate the fact that Jonathan and his brother have a very skinny, long neck, so we can exaggerate that for the sake of the caricature. And now let's scale with using the median point as our pivot. Let's make our head a little bigger. Then select the neck region. Hit Alt-S to scale that in to make it skinny. There we go. That's very, very rough, but at least it's a little bit closer than it was before. Now we can jump into sculpt mode, and for this tutorial I will be taking advantage of dynamic topology. So in the topology dropdown, let's enable dynamic. Detail size of 30 is a good place to start. I will also turn on collapse short edges. And yeah, let's jump over to the inflate brush because my geometry is very low resolution and it's very faceted. It's kind of distracting to look at. So often when I use dynamic topology, using the inflate at a very low strength, I will simply click to generate the new topology but barely affect the actual shape at all, and then shift click to smooth where I just inflated. This allows me to uniformly up-res my geometry. So let's do that all around, and I think if I open my options drop down, yeah, I don't have unified size and strength enabled. I like to do that so that all my brushes share those settings instead of having an individual control per brush. So let's continue smoothing out and up-resing our geometry a bit. Remember, with dynamic topology, the further I zoom in, the higher the resolution of generated polygon faces there will be. And you'll notice that I am sculpting with symmetry on. Just a little bit more up-resing to do. Okay, that'll be good enough. And the first thing, if you remember, that I noticed is the jaw. And that's where I will start with the sculpture. So with my crease brush, let's see, undo that stroke. I want to make the default behavior add instead of subtract. And let's cut in a jawline. Keep it very straight and cornerless. Remember, that was the key feature about it. Okay, smooth out on the outskirts of the stroke, or smooth around the outskirts of the stroke. Maybe push that in a bit. Cut in a little further. There we go. Now with my grab brush, let's move it into a better shape. There we go. Now grab the chin. Let's move it down. Go ahead and give the bulbous end with my inflate brush. Just create a little ball at the end of the chin. Remember, that's another distinguishing feature I want to include that we can see over here in the photograph. Okay. Back to my grab brush. Let's pull the chin down, exaggerate those proportions. Making sure to not include a corner. at least not a corner from the front angle. But as we can see in the side view, he does have a bit of a corner from that angle. All right, now how about my inflate brush? We'll just inflate in the crease of the jawline to bring those two surfaces closer together. Give him a little bit more meat. And while I'm looking at the side view, I have to tilt my head because in the photograph, Jonathan's head is tilted down. But the shape that I'm seeing is similar to a greater than sign. So with my grease pencil, let's mark out the shape that I see. Something like that, where the tip of the nose is the apex of the point forward. And then from there to the chin, it slants back towards the neck. So let's include that, not only include it, but exaggerate that feature. Because remember, that's the whole point of a caricature. So from the side profile, it will look something like this in the end. Okay, let's, from the front, that's not really looking good anymore. So let's readdress that, give it more of a pointed direction, a narrow jaw. Try inflating our chin up a bit more. Give it that bulbous feel. Okay, now I think is a good time to cut in the eye cavities because we will be using a sphere as the eyeball. But first we need a cavity. So with my inflate brush, let's just push inward there. Something like that. Perhaps pull my ears down a bit. They seem unnaturally high. And then at this point, we can include the actual eyeball geometry. So jump back to object mode, Shift A, mesh UV sphere. Rotate that 90 degrees in the X direction. Switch back over to my mouse for easier manipulation. Let's scale it down. And I'm just going to ballpark the size of the eyeball because I know that it's roughly the size of a golf ball. So something like that. And then roughly judge where it needs to be placed. I think that looks pretty good from the front. From the side, we have to use a little bit of our imagination, but we can kind of see where that should be placed. So let's move it back a little bit more. Okay, I think that's pretty good. Tab into edit mode and quickly create the rest of the eyeball shape, or imply the shape by moving these faces backwards, which creates the iris. Let's go a little bit further, and then maybe scale this down a bit. E to extrude in the Y direction to create the pupil. And then let's cut some holding edges because I'll add a subdivision surface modifier. Okay, let's first smooth my object normals. Let's see here, under shading in object tools, let's click smooth and then add a subdivision surface modifier. There we go. Nice and smooth, approximating the feel of an eyeball. There we go. Then add a mirror modifier and let's choose our cube mesh, which should be renamed to be called head. And then the sphere should be called eyes. There we go. For the eyes, I'm using the pivot, or I mean the origin of this geometry, which is at the origin of the world. And that way, our eyeball maintains its own origin, but when it's mirrored mirrored over to the other side thanks to the origin of this mesh. That's looking pretty good. Now we can jump back to our head geometry, back into sculpt mode, re-enable dynamic topology, or Control D as the shortcut. And let's increase our detail size, or rather decrease the detail size to 20 so we get finer polygons being generated. And we need to create the eyelids. So I'll do this with the clay strips brush. But actually first, I'm going to push this side in a little bit more. There we go. Now let's create the eyelids with the clay strips brush. And I'm simply going to make several strokes on top of one another to build up the geometry on this top half. There we go. Very easy to do with clay strips. And let's see, I want to, yes, collapse short edges is on. That's what I want because it just creates more even geometry. There we go, and that's pretty much the upper eyelid. Now let's work on the lower one, just rough in that shape the exact same way. There we go. That's the basic mass that I need to shape properly. So let's go back to the front view so we can get an idea of his eye-opening shape. And remember, I want to exaggerate this slant that we feel with the planes of the eyes. So right now he looks way too sleepy. Let's pull down the lower eyelid. Give it a nice rounded U shape, like we see in the photograph. And then for the upper eyelid, I need to pinch these two surfaces together. Hit P to jump to the pinch brush. And then in our options, I'm going to lock all the axes except for Z because I want to pinch up and down, which is not working. I must have wrong rotations involved here. Let's see. Let's hit Control A, apply rotations. There we go, our rotations are now zeroed out. Back to sculpt mode. Control D for enable dynamic topology. Let's try pinching that again. Yeah, that's the direction that I want. But I don't want to create new geometry for all this, so let's disable collapse short edges. Pinch those two together, those two surfaces, because it comes down to a very crisp point over here in the photograph. All right, that's looking better. Let's see, disable lock X and Y axes. And let's try inflating this corner a bit to tighten up that crease even more. And I want a little bit of overlap from the upper eyelid, so let's increase the volume up there. Create a crease leading out from the eyelids. Let's see, back to the clay strips. This angle is not matching, so forget the clay strips, just pull that angle down. There we go, that's more like the artwork over there. And slowly but surely we're coming along. Let's see, what else can we address? Let's try pulling the upper eyelid up just a bit. And in general, it's all way too big. So let's see. If my eyeball's too big, that's fine. Let's do something about it. Select my eyeball geometry. Let's remove both modifiers. Or no, not both of them. Let's leave the mirror, apply the mirror, then shift select our head, Control J, so that all our geometry is one piece. Now I can tab into edit mode, select the eyeball geometry, which is its own contained closed set of polygons, and I can do that by selecting any element, Control L to select linked, and now I have my entire polygon island. Turn on proportional editing enabled so that it will affect all the geometry of this object. And so scaling that down, let's decrease the fall off. Here we go, let's scale that down to, let's say 0.8. And, whoops, let's undo that and enable X mirror. Let's see, under mesh options, turn that on. And this doesn't appear to be working with proportional editing. How about if we turn on topology mirror? And no, that's still not working. Okay, that's fine. We'll just scale it down to 0.8. Tab out of edit mode into object mode. Actually, before we do that, let's move the eye a little bit to the right. Yeah, okay, that looks good. Now, before we go back to sculpt mode, let's extract this mesh by hitting P selection. There we go. Now, with my head geometry selected, jump to sculpt mode and enable dynamic, and then we have the option to symmetrize. So the direction -X, which is the screen left side, will mirror that to the right side. So hit symmetrize. Now I just need to re-add that mirror modifier to our eyeball geometry. This is called eyes. Let's see, what is this? I'm not sure why I have two eyeball meshes there. Let's get rid of one, add that mirror modifier, and because it was part of this geometry, it inherited the same origin, so we don't need to choose a mirror object for this. Let's go ahead and add the subdivision surface, bump the views up to level 2. Okay, there we go. So now we have smaller eyeballs, and this I think makes more sense. So back to sculpting the eye region. Into sculpt mode, Control D to enable dynamic topology. And let's just continue working on the shape a bit. Let's try pinching this distance down so the upper eyelid is not quite so large. Not forgetting to emphasize the slant of the eyes that we see from the photograph. Increase the volume of the eyelid. There we go. And then over here I need to push inwards because there's way too much mass and flesh for the upper eyelid on the inner side of the eyeball. There we go, that's a little bit better. Let's try to add the overhang of flesh we see just above the upper eyelid with the inflate. Then with our crease brush, let's draw this same fold just above the upper eyelid as it hooks around like that. Let's smooth out some of the profile that we see. It's making it look so bumpy. Re-enable collapse short edges because my geometry is getting a little bit messy. So enabling that will reunify the polygon size. There we go. Now for the temple region just behind the ocular cavity, let's push that in to create the temple. Very subtle indentation behind the eye. There we go. Let's take a step back, see what we have to work with. And I'm just going to try exaggerating the slant of our eye just a little bit more. Yeah, that's feeling a little better. Now, how about we take a break from that because the eye region is one of the harder areas to get right. But let's move on before we get too focused too early. And in the next video, we will move on to address the rest of our key distinguishing features.